My name is Kaitlin O'Neill, and I was interested in learning more about the lobbying process that takes place here in the United States. To do this, I reviewed scholars' work regarding lobbying at both the federal and state levels. However, the state of Iowa was largely kept out of that research. That is where I tried to bridge the gap in the literature between the federal government, the states, and the state of Iowa. I was able to do this by talking to members of the Iowa State Legislature and learning about the lobbying process here in the state of Iowa. I think it is important to begin with a few facts about the lobbying process before we jump more into the research. The average senator at the federal level needs to pull in more than $14,000 every day just to remain in office. Now, this doesn't mean that if a senator doesn't pull in $14,000 a day or doesn't have that sitting in front of them, that they're going to be removed from office. But this money will help them in future endeavors. An easy way for senators to make that kind of money is to turn to lobbyists who are able to make large donations by organizing fundraisers in which they're able to buy influence from their clients. Former lobbyist Jack Abramoff said of the fundraising process, "You can't take a congressman to lunch for $25 and buy him a steak, but you can take him to a fundraising lunch and not only buy him that steak, but give him $25,000 extra and call it a fundraiser." There are many stipulations on what lobbyists are allowed and not allowed to do at both the federal and state level. At the federal level, all lobbyists are held to the same standards. But at the state level, each state has their own set of rules and regulations for lobbyists to follow. Before jumping further into lobbying research, it is important to provide definitions to truly understand the lobbying process. According to the Lobbying Disclosure Act of 1995, lobbying is defined as an oral or written communication, including electronic communications, to a covered executive branch official or a covered legislative branch official that is made on behalf of a client with regard to the formulation, modification, or adoption of federal legislation, including legislative proposals. Another definition that needs to be defined is the term lobbyist, or those doing the lobbying. The term lobbyist, as defined by the United States Senate, is any individual who is employed or retained by a client for financial or other compensation for services that include more than one lobbying contact, other than an individual whose lobbying activities constitute less than 20% of the time engaged in the services provided by such individual to that client over a 3-month period. These definitions are very wordy and can be complicated to comprehend, but these definitions provide an insight into the complexity of the lobbying world and processes. Looking at lobbying at the federal level, there are regulations that lobbyists must follow. The Lobbying Disclosure Act, or LDA, was signed into law by President Bill Clinton in 1995 and took effect in 1996. This act is a federal lobbying statute, so it does not apply to state lobbying activities, only federal ones. Under the LDA, lobbyists must register and file reports. Overall, this act increased the number of registered lobbyists and also increased the amount of information that the lobbyists must disclose. Some of the new information that the lobbyists must disclose includes, but is not limited to, the issues that are being lobbied for, the lobbyists who are involved, and the cost of the lobbying. Now, lobbying is very important at the federal level, but it is also very important at the state level as well. Lobbying activities, processes, and procedures look different when they are conducted at the state level and when they are conducted at the federal level. Federally, in the United States, around $3.4 billion are spent annually in the lobbying sector. Now, the price differs when it comes to states, but it also differs depending on the size of the states. For example, California spends around $296.4 million every year on lobbying expenditures and activities. The state of New York spends around $254.9 million on lobbying expenditures and activities, and the state of Iowa spends around $20.4 million on lobbying expenditures and activities. Now, the two larger states, California and New York, spend much more money than the state of Iowa does, and that will be described why later. But just by looking at the amount of money spent, you can see that lobbying is an integral part, an important part of the legislative process. Now, it's beneficial because these lobbyists can provide external information to elected officials, and this is why it's a prominent force in the political scene. Now, the next two slides will show models and hypotheses that are used to keep track of lobbying in the United States. The first is the Energy Stability Model, or ESA, and it focuses its attention on two factors that are critical to the mobilization of interest groups and lobby organizations. The two factors are the density and the diversity of groups that are within a certain population. The energy portion of the model refers to policy issues of concern to interest groups and levels of uncertainties that lobbyists have about their policy outcomes. The area aspect is interpreted as the potential number of constituents in any given sector that may be represented by an organization or an interest group. When combined, the energy and the area aspects of the energy stability model are expected to be able to support the carrying capacity of political systems for interest groups as they determine the overcrowding of the lobbying community. The next hypothesis, the density dependence hypothesis, states that as the population of organized interest and lobbying organizations mature, their growth rate should slow, as further additions to the population must compete for scarce resources. Research thus far conducted has found that the rate is occurring oppositely from what the hypothesis states. In 1990, there was around 29,000 registered lobbyists in total in the United States. But by 1997, that number had grown to around 34,000. That equated to an average growth of around 26.6% per state. The hypothesis projected that over time, the accession of new lobbying organizations would slow, but in the 1990s, 44 out of the 50 states saw an increase in their number of registered lobbyists rather than a decrease. The previous two slides talked about methods that tracked lobbying in the United States. Now I will briefly switch to talk about California state lobbying, in which research has talked about. In California, there are four main venues in which lobbyists can pursue. They are the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, and the direct democracy venue. Now in California, lobbyists are known as policy entrepreneurs, and they look to venue shop. And they venue shop at the four venues that were just listed. Lobbyists are proactively shopping for the best venue to influence their policies, and they know that if they do not achieve their lobbying outcomes in one venue, and knowing that someone else will eventually control that venue and have more strength than they will begin to search for a new one, in which their lobbying outcomes will be achieved. Now begins the portion of my presentation in which very little research had been conducted prior to mine. In order to obtain information about the lobbying processes in Iowa, I interviewed members of the Iowa State Legislature to learn more. Here's what I found out. The lobbyists that are seen in the Iowa State Capitol belong to one of three groups. The first group is that they are there lobbying for a personal vendetta. As an example, one could be very passionate about school shootings or about texting and driving or about drunk driving. So when a bill arises at the Capitol for one of those three examples just given, they will come to lobby for it because they are very passionate about it. Typically, these are the constituents in the state. Another group are known as revolving door lobbyists. These are former congressional employees who have shifted from their post as a senator or a representative and is now a lobbyist. They have revolved around the circle and are therefore a revolving door lobbyist. Another group, the final group, is attorneys, which in Iowa constitute the highest percentage of lobbyists, which is around 70%. The legislators that I spoke to like these types of lobbyists the best because they understand how the legislative process works, are skilled in reading bills and amendments, and typically give the legislators a list of pros and cons before they make a final decision. Now, looking at how legislators in the state kind of refer to lobbyists, they don't refer to them as lobbyists. They don't use the term lobbyist because it carries around a negative connotation. Instead, they refer to them as advocates, consultants, peers, educators, and they view them as individuals or groups who aid the legislative process, not hinder it. Now, when a lobbyist comes to a legislator and gives them a proposal, it's not just the legislator who is involved in that process. Elected officials do not take the advice of lobbyists right away. Instead, the matter is taken to what is known as the Senate Analysis Committee, and they're used as an information source. The committee will receive all potential lobbying changes and view how either following the advice of the lobbyist or not following that advice would affect different groups of people and in what ways it would affect them. Once all of the information is found and determined, the Senate Analysis Committee then goes back to the legislator and gives them all the information. From there, the final decision is then made by the legislator. The proposal is given to this committee because legislators know they cannot trust a lobbyist viewpoint right away, as it is typically pursued to push a personal vendetta. And the Senate Analysis Committee typically is trusted because they are not a nonpartisan group. From my further research and talking with Iowa state legislators, I learned that the state of Iowa utilizes slips, and these slips provide information of what type of lobbyist is at the Capitol and what they're there to discuss. So if a pink slip is given to a legislator, it tells them that a constituent is there, and typically the legislator will go out to the rotunda to meet with them. This is typically those who are there for a personal vendetta. If a white slip is given, it tells the legislator that a lobbyist is there representing a firm or one who is coming with a group. When given a white slip, a legislator typically will not go to the rotunda and discuss the matter in public. Instead, they go to a room that is specifically designed and designated for lobbying activities, therefore called the lobbyist room. In that room, the conversation normally begins with a lobbyist approaching a legislator and saying, "We wish to talk to you in regards to X, Y, or Z bill." An Iowa state senator said that when approached by a lobbyist in this manner, she asked herself one of two questions. The first question being, "Why are you placing this at my feet?" And the second question being, "Why are you giving me your problems?" The same legislator also said that when approached by a lobbyist, she feels as if she's being asked to select her favorite child. In this sense, she means that does she follow the proposal that the lobbyist is there for? Does she follow what she believes is best? Does she follow what the constituent wants? She's being pulled in three different directions and doesn't know which one to go to. Now, lobbyists in the state of Iowa also try and sway both sides of the aisle. However, the majority in the Iowa State Senate holds more power, which means that they typically get more lobbyists than the minority get. Lobbyists in the state of Iowa do not target conservatives or liberals more than the other. Instead, they target the majority group over the minority group. Knowing that the majority group holds more power and will therefore give them a better chance of their lobbying proposals being achieved. Lobbyists in Iowa, though, also look to please both sides of the aisle. While they do not target conservatives or liberals more than another, they do attempt to give information that would be beneficial to those on the other side of the party lines. For example, if a lobbyist were to make a deal with a conservative representative, they would then go to an Iowa liberal representative and inform them on the deal that was just struck, hoping to add another party to the mix to enhance their chances of getting more for their lobbying activity. Overall, lobbyists in Iowa are smart people. According to an Iowa state senator, lobbyists in the state are smart at learning what the legislators stand for, and they modify their work to mold around what the legislator believes. Doing this makes the work easier for the lobbyists, knowing that their views mirror that of the one they are attempting to lobby. As mentioned earlier, lobbyists in the state do not carry around the negative connotation that is typically associated with lobbyists in other states and even at the federal level. This makes lobbying more prone to happen in Iowa because there is no negative connotation associated with them. However, multiple Iowa state legislators have informed me that you're going to get your good lobbyists and your bad lobbyists. But your good lobbyists do a great job in respecting the final decision that is made by the legislator, even if it does not go the way that they wanted it to. Iowa lobbyists are also discreet about the way the legislators vote. They don't go and tell other lobbyists the final decision before the final decision is ready to be shared. There are regulations that need to be followed from the standpoint of a lobbyist and from the standpoint of a legislator. There are 4 types of lobbyists in Iowa who are regulated. The first type is a compensated lobbyist, which is one who receives pay to encourage the passage or defeat of legislation. The second is an organization lobbyist. That is one who represents a firm or a business. The third type is called a government lobbyist. This is one who represents a federal, state, local, or government agency. And the last is a $1,000 expenditure. This is a lobbyist who annually spends more than $1,000 to communicate to members of the legislature. Some of the prohibitions include not being allowed to offer economic investments to an elected official with the intent to influence an elected official's overall performance. So a lobbyist can't give a legislator a certain sum of money just for them to support the bill. There has to be a legit reason for the money to be granted. Another prohibition is not being allowed to receive a bonus or a fee as a result that was obtained by the lobbyist. This means that a lobbyist cannot get a raise from the organization because of the result of the lobbying. If a legislator voted in favor of a lobby proposal, that lobbyist cannot obtain a bonus from their corporation. Registered lobbyists in the state of Iowa are also not allowed to attempt to influence an elected official's actions by promising to support the elected official's campaign. Now, lobbyists aren't the only one who has provisions and prohibitions. Legislators also have the same as well. There are rules about accepting gifts from lobbyists, such as if a gift is allowed to be accepted if the gift is non-monetary and it is donated within 30 days to a public body. That public body could be a Department of Administrative Services or an educational or charitable organization. Contributions of gifts can also be given to a candidate's committee that they work for, and they are allowed to use that money as they would any other donation. However, any public official or member of that official's immediate family are not allowed to receive or solicit any gift from a donor that falls under the definition of a gift under the Iowa Code. So not only are the legislators put under certain provisions, but also their family is as well. And a legislator who has the power to encourage the passage, defeat, or modification of legislation is not allowed to receive food, beverages, or any scheduled entertainments with a value in excess of $3 with a registered lobbyist. That directly goes back to the Jack Abramoff quote from the beginning, where you can't go out and buy a legislator a $25 steak, but if it's at a fundraising opportunity and event, you can buy them that $25 steak and throw an extra $25,000 onto the end of it. In conclusion, each state has their own stipulations regarding lobbyists. Some are the same and some are different depending on states. However, scholars have largely left out Iowa out of the articles describing lobbyists, lobbying activities, procedures, steps. Iowa is not included in there. Iowa state senators have provided me with excellent information that has given me a clearer picture into the lobbying process in the state. But the research must not stop here. Iowa is but one state that has been left out of scholarly writings on lobbying. More information is still out there, and more research needs to be conducted to understand more about the lobbying process. Thank you.